I sat down for coffee recently with an old friend who had just turned 61. He had his Social Security statement spread out on the table. He was rubbing his knuckles. The kind of slow, absent-minded rubbing you do when your joints have been complaining for years and you've just learned to live with it. He looked at me and said, "Wes, the government is telling me to wait until 70 to get an extra $800 a month. But at 70, I'm honestly not sure I'll be able to step up into an RV anymore." He's a carpenter. Decades of scaffolding. His knees have more mileage than most vehicles. And the software didn't know that. The break-even calculator gave him a clean number. A crossover point. An age where waiting supposedly pays off. It assumed he'd be reasonably healthy, reasonably mobile, reasonably eager to spend money at 72 the same way he would at 62. That's not a retirement plan. That's a spreadsheet wearing a costume. Social Security decisions get framed as a math problem because math is easier to explain than life. Run the numbers, find the break-even age, wait if you can, claim early if you must. Clean, logical, and for a lot of people, completely disconnected from what their actual body and actual circumstances are telling them. But here's what I want to be straight with you about. Claiming at 62 is not automatically the wrong move. And waiting until 70 is not automatically the smart one. The question is whether you're using the right lens to decide. If you're somewhere between 55 and 65 right now, exhausted and wondering whether you're doing this right, you're not alone, and it's not because you failed to plan. The system is genuinely confusing. It's designed that way. What I want to walk through today are the two mathematical traps most people don't see until it's too late, and two hidden penalties that don't show up in any free online calculator. Not to scare you, but because if you're going to make this call, you deserve to make it with the full picture. Before we get into it, what age are you planning to claim and why? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Let's start with the number everyone knows but most people underestimate. For Gen X, anyone born in 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67. That's the baseline SSA uses to calculate your full benefit. If you claim at 62, you don't get a small discount. You take a permanent 30% reduction. Not temporary, not something that resets later, locked in for life. Run the actual math on that. Say your full benefit at 67 would be $2,000 a month. Claim at 62, and you're looking at $1,400 a month instead. That's $600 gone every single month, every year, for the rest of your life. And here's the part people miss. SSA applies its annual cost of living adjustment, KOH-LA, as a percentage of your base benefit. So if KOH-LA runs 3% this year, it adds $60 to a $2,000 base. It only adds $42 to a $1,400 base. The gap doesn't stay at $600. It compounds. By the time you're 80, you're not looking at a $600 monthly difference anymore. You're looking at something much wider. That's the permanent cost of claiming early. Most people know this part. What they underestimate is how fast that gap grows. Now, I have to be honest about something. 10 years ago, I thought the same thing a lot of people think. Take the money early, put it to work, and beat the system. Keep your assets in your own hands rather than letting the government hold them. I genuinely believed that was the sharper move. Then I watched what actually happened to people who tried it. And I had to admit I'd been calculating the wrong thing entirely. Here's how it usually goes. Someone like Mark claims at 62, takes that $1,400 a month, and puts it directly into index funds. His logic is sound on the surface. If the market returns 8% annually, he can more than offset the 30% haircut. He's not being reckless. He did the homework. What Mark's spreadsheet didn't account for was sequence of returns risk. He retired into a down market. At 63, the market drops 15%. His portfolio takes a hit right at the beginning, exactly when he can least afford it, because he's pulling money out rather than adding. His plan assumed smooth, average returns. Markets don't work that way. They're lumpy and indifferent to your retirement date. At the same time, his medical expenses started climbing. Not dramatically, just the steady, relentless kind. A new prescription, an extra specialist visit, a procedure that insurance covered less than expected. Healthcare inflation has been running higher than general inflation for years. His Invest the Difference plan was built on assumptions that the real world quietly violated one by one. And through all of it, his Social Security benefit stayed at $1,400. Permanently. The deeper issue is what you're actually trading when you claim early to invest. You're giving up a government-backed, inflation-adjusted, longevity-insured income stream in exchange for market exposure at the exact moment you have the least capacity to absorb a bad sequence of returns. You're trading a floor for a bet. For some people, that bet makes sense. If you have significant assets, a high risk tolerance, and a shorter life expectancy, the math can work in your favor. But for most people sitting at 62, exhausted and looking for an exit, it's not a calculated bet. It's wishful thinking dressed up as a strategy. The KOH lack compounding alone should give you pause. $1 of base benefit at 67 is worth more in inflation protection over 20 years than $1 of base benefit at 62, because every annual adjustment is calculated off a higher starting point. You don't just lose $600 a month. You lose $600 a month that was supposed to grow. Does that mean everyone should wait until 67 or 70? No, we'll get to that. But before you tell yourself, I'll just invest it, be honest about what you're actually taking on. Market volatility, healthcare inflation, sequence risk, all of it layered on top of a permanently reduced base. That 30% cut isn't the worst part of claiming early. If you're married, the decision you make at 62 doesn't just affect your check. It follows your spouse for the rest of their life too. Let me tell you about Sarah and John. John spent 35 years in logistics management. Good salary, disciplined saver, the kind of guy who had a folder labeled retirement in his filing cabinet since his early 40s. He was the higher earner in the marriage by a significant margin. When John turned 62, he made a decision that felt completely reasonable at the time. He'd been reading about Social Security's long-term funding projections. The headlines weren't reassuring. He figured better to lock in what's guaranteed now than gamble on a system that might look different in 10 years. So he filed. Took the 30% reduction, started collecting $1,540 a month instead of the $2,200 he would have received at 67. John passed away at 75. Sarah was 72. She had her own small Social Security benefit, about $800 a month from her own work record. But as John's surviving spouse, she was entitled to step up to his benefit instead if it was larger. That's how survivor benefits work. The widow or widower keeps the higher of the two checks. Except John's check wasn't $2,200. It was $1,540. That's the number Sarah inherited. That's what she'll live on from 72 until the end of her life. She didn't make that decision. John made it at 62, 13 years earlier, when he was worried about a funding headline and wanted some certainty. He didn't think of it as a decision that would shape Sarah's finances after he was gone. But it was. This is the part of the Social Security conversation that almost never comes up in the break-even calculator. Survivor benefit isn't a footnote. For the lower-earning spouse, statistically, still more often the wife, it can be the single largest financial variable in the last decade of their life. If you're the higher earner in your household, your claiming age is not just your decision. It's a decision you're making for two people, potentially across two different lifetimes. Now let's talk about something that works in your favor, if you know it's there. When John retired at 62 and started collecting Social Security immediately, he closed a door he probably didn't know existed. Planners call it the golden window. I think that name actually fits. Here's the setup. Under the Secure Act 2.0, required minimum distributions, the mandatory annual withdrawals from your traditional IRA or 401k don't kick in until age 73. So if you stop working at, say, 62 or 63, there's a gap. You're no longer earning a salary. You haven't started Social Security. You haven't hit RMD age. Your taxable income for that window of time is lower than it may ever be again for the rest of your life. That's the golden window. Age is roughly 62 to 73. And what you can do inside it matters. This is when Roth conversions become genuinely powerful. A Roth conversion means moving money from a traditional IRA, where every dollar withdrawn in retirement gets taxed as ordinary income, into a Roth IRA, where it grows tax-free and you never pay taxes on it again. During the golden window, if your income is low enough, you can convert chunks of that traditional IRA money at the 10% or 12% federal tax bracket. Pay a modest tax now on your terms. Eliminate a larger tax burden later on the IRS's terms. Run a quick version of the math. Say you have $400,000 sitting in a traditional IRA. If you convert $40,000 per year over 10 years during the golden window, and you're in the 12% bracket, you're paying roughly $4,800 a year in federal tax on those conversions. In exchange, that $400,000 and whatever it grows into never gets taxed again. You also reduce the balance that will eventually trigger RMDs, which means lower forced income in your 70s and 80s, which means less exposure to the tax complications we're about to get into. But if you file for Social Security at 62, you add that income back into the equation immediately. Your taxable income goes up. Your conversion headroom shrinks. The window doesn't close completely, but it gets significantly narrower. You're paying more in tax per dollar converted, which means converting less makes sense, which means more of your retirement assets stay in the tax-deferred bucket. Exactly where they'll cause the most damage later. John's decision at 62 wasn't just about survivor benefits. It also meant he and Sarah paid higher taxes on their IRA withdrawals throughout their 60s and early 70s than they needed to. Not because they were reckless. Because no one explained to them that the years between stopping work and starting benefits were actually an asset, one you can either use or accidentally give away. The golden window doesn't care whether you needed the money or not. Once you open Social Security, it starts shrinking. And once it's gone, it's gone. If you're heading into retirement in the next few years, that window is worth putting on paper before you make any claiming decision. It won't show up on the Social Security website. It won't appear in the break-even calculator. And it's not the last thing the calculator misses. The reason a lot of retirees end up quietly frustrated when they open their tax return each April comes down to a trap that was set in the 1980s and has never been adjusted for inflation. That's where we're going next. If these breakdowns are helping you see the retirement picture more clearly, without the jargon fog, hit subscribe. That's what Wes Investor is here for. Sarah thought the hardest part was behind her. John was gone. She'd adjusted to living on one income. She knew her monthly Social Security check was smaller than it should have been. That was John's decision at 62, and she'd made her peace with it. She was managing. Then April came. Her tax preparer called to walk her through the return. Sarah listened. Then she asked him to repeat the number. Then she sat quietly for a moment and said, "But I'm making less money than when John was alive." She was right. Her total household income had dropped significantly after John passed, and yet her tax bill had gone up. This is not a glitch. It is the system working exactly as designed, just not in your favor. Here's the mechanism. When Sarah and John were both alive, they filed as married filing jointly. The tax brackets for joint filers are wide. The standard deduction is large. The income thresholds that determine how much of your Social Security gets taxed are set at $44,000 of what the IRS calls provisional income. Provisional income is not your regular income. It's calculated as your adjusted gross income, plus any tax-exempt interest, plus half of your Social Security benefit. It's a specific formula, and it determines how much of your Social Security check the government treats as taxable. If your provisional income as a married couple stays below $32,000, none of your Social Security is taxed. Between $32,000 and $44,000, up to 50% gets taxed. Above $44,000, up to 85% of your Social Security benefit becomes taxable income. Now John is gone. Sarah files as single. The threshold doesn't get cut in half to account for the fact that she's now supporting one person instead of two. It drops from $44,000 to $34,000. She loses roughly $10,000 of breathing room overnight. Her income didn't change dramatically, but her filing status did. And that filing status change is enough to push her provisional income over the single filer threshold, making a larger portion of her Social Security suddenly taxable. She's earning less. She's paying more. That's the widow's penalty. And here's what makes it worse. Those provisional income thresholds. $25,000 and $34,000 for single filers, $32,000 and $44,000 for joint filers, were set in 1983. They have never been adjusted for inflation. Not once in over 40 years. In 1983, those thresholds captured a small percentage of retirees. Today, because wages and benefits have risen with inflation, but the thresholds have not, roughly half of Social Security recipients pay tax on their benefits. That percentage keeps growing every year without Congress touching a single number. Inflation does the work automatically. This is what planners call the tax torpedo. It's not a sudden spike. It's a slow, structural drain that accelerates as your other income sources grow. Here's where it connects back to claiming early. If you file for Social Security at 62, and you're also drawing from a traditional IRA or 401k, you're stacking income sources. Every dollar you pull from a traditional IRA counts toward your provisional income calculation. And here's the part that catches people off guard. For every additional dollar of IRA withdrawal that pushes you past the 85% threshold, up to 85 cents of Social Security becomes newly taxable on top of it. You don't just pay tax on the IRA dollar. You effectively trigger tax on additional Social Security income at the same time. $1 and can create $1.85 of taxable income. That's the torpedo. It's invisible until it isn't. Put the full picture together. A 30% permanent reduction from claiming at 62. A survivor benefit locked at that reduced level, which Sarah will carry for the rest of her life. A widow's penalty that shrinks her tax filing headroom the moment John is gone. And a provisional income formula that hasn't been touched since Reagan was in office, steadily pulling more of her benefit into the taxable column every year. None of that shows up in the free break-even calculator. All of it is real. Put it together, and it's not complicated once you see it plainly. The 30% reduction is the starting wound. The widow's penalty is the secondary damage, and the tax torpedo is the slow bleed that follows both of them. They don't operate independently. They stack. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Okay, Wes, so you're telling me I should just white-knuckle it until 70 like every suit on financial TV tells me to. No, that's not what I'm saying. The math is real. But you are not a calculation. I'm a financial planner. I love spreadsheets. I have strong opinions about tax brackets, and I find Roth conversion math genuinely interesting at dinner parties, which tells you something about me. But I have to be straight with you about something. My spreadsheet doesn't know how your knees feel in the morning. It doesn't know your father had his first cardiac event at 67. It doesn't know that your job has been quietly hollowing you out for the last 4 years, and that the version of you who shows up on Monday is a noticeably diminished version of the person you used to be. The math should serve your life. Your life should not serve the math. This is the part of the Social Security conversation that gets skipped because it doesn't fit neatly into a calculator. But it might be the most important variable of all. Retirement researchers and geriatric physicians tend to describe the post-retirement years in 3 phases. The go-go years, roughly your early 60s to early 70s, when you're mobile, energetic, and actually want to spend money on experiences. The slow-go years, mid to late 70s, when travel gets harder, health management takes more time, and spending patterns shift toward comfort rather than adventure. And the no-go years, 80 and beyond, when most discretionary spending contracts significantly, whether you want it to or not. Here's the financial reality underneath that framework. The years when you're most likely to spend money on the things that actually make retirement feel like retirement. Travel, family visits, physical activities, new experiences. Cluster heavily in that go-go window. Studies on retirement spending consistently show that real discretionary expenditure peaks in the early retirement years and declines steadily from there, which means the question isn't just, what's my biggest check? The question is, when do I most need the money, and what will I actually do with it? If your health history, your family's health history, or your current physical condition suggests your go-go window runs from 62 to 70 rather than 70 to 78, then the break-even calculator is asking the wrong question. It's optimizing for a number at an age when the spending opportunity may already be behind you. $1,400 a month at 62, used to take your spouse through national parks or fly out to see the grandkids 4 times a year. That has a return on life that $2,000 a month at 70 from a chair you don't get out of very often simply cannot match. That's not a financial argument against waiting. It's a reminder that the financial argument for waiting assumes you'll be there, healthy and spending, to collect the benefit of the larger check. If that assumption doesn't hold for your situation, the entire optimization flips. So here's the practical reframe. Stop running the break-even calculator. Start running what I'd call the go-go calculator. 2 honest questions. When does your go-go window realistically open and close, given your health, your job, your energy? And what would you actually do with the money if you had it during that window? If your go-go window is wide and your finances can support waiting, delay. Use the golden window for Roth conversions. Protect your spouse's survivor benefit, and let the KOH law compounding work for you. If your go-go window is narrow, your health is uncertain, or your job is genuinely damaging you, claiming at 62 may be the financially sound decision when the full picture includes quality of life, not just check size. Neither answer is lazy. Neither answer is wrong. They're just answers to different questions. And the right question is the one that accounts for your actual life, not a hypothetical one. Pair that with a smart withdrawal strategy to stay below the provisional income thresholds. Protect your spouse's survivor benefit if you're the higher earner, and map out your Roth conversion runway before you file for anything. There's no perfect age. There's only the right age for your picture. If this video helped you see that picture a little more clearly, without making it more complicated, subscribe to Wes Investor. That's the whole point of this channel. And I'll leave you with one last question for the comments. What matters more to you right now? A bigger check at 70 or healthy years to spend it starting at 62? Tell me where you land. I read everyone. See you next time.